Like the majority of children in America, I was raised Christian. Specifically, I was raised Catholic, but in my opinion, at the end of the day, if you believe in Jesus Christ as your Messiah, you're a Christian. Even when I was still in the faith, I never understood why so many people put stock into minuscule details about religion. And frankly, I've gotten sick of people saying I left the faith because I was the wrong kind of Christian, or that I needed to try their particular denomination in order to receive true spiritual enlightenment, or what have you. To that, I simply say, no. Christianity isn't right for me at all. It doesn't matter if you're touting Catholicism, Protestantism, Baptism, Orthodox, Pentecostal, whatever. I know myself, and I know my soul. So if you're only here because you want to convert me back to the religion that nearly killed me, kindly leave. This isn't to say that all Christians are bad people. The vast majority of Christians that I've interacted with in my life are absolutely wonderful people who wouldn't wish harm on anyone. But there are people that distort the message of kindness that Christianity was originally about. And in my opinion, religion should be up to the individual. So, if Christianity is what makes you happy, if it's what you feel best represents you in your soul, then that's all anyone can ask for. But the second your religion becomes an excuse to hurt somebody else, that's where I draw the line. For those of you that are still here and are still willing to listen to my journey with an open mind and a listening heart, thank you. Like most Christian children, I was baptized shortly after I was born and started attending Sunday school when I was about 2 or 3. I went to a secular school for kindergarten, and my best friend there was Jewish, so I learned about other religions when I was about 4, but I never once entertained the idea that those religions were wrong in some way. Of course, this sparked a lot of cognitive dissonance for me much later down the line, but I was happy with my faith as a child. And it was everywhere, too. In addition to Clifford the Big Red Dog and Cyberchase and Arthur and whatnot, no, we didn't have cable. I also watched VeggieTales and 321 Penguins and listened to Adventures in Odyssey on practically every car ride. I had picture book Bibles on my shelf and little prayer booklets from Sunday school, along with many other crafts from Sunday school, including a little "He is Risen" sign that I made from popsicle sticks that hung on our door for over a decade. We said grace before every meal. Mom taught me how to pray before bed. Dad answered all the typical questions a small Christian child would have. Where is God? Did God make us? How long has God existed? The idea of someone not being religious was completely foreign to me. One time, my brother and I had dinner at a friend's house, and I held out my hands to say grace like we always did at home, but they just started eating without saying anything. To say I was confused was an understatement. As I said, I went to secular school for preschool and kindergarten, but I started Catholic school when I was in 1st grade. Going from a regular school building to a place with a crucifix in every single room should have been jarring, but seeing as there was a crucifix in almost every room in my house, it wasn't that bad. It was also my first time having an actual religion class, which was pretty much Sunday school but every day. It was in 1st grade religion class that I learned about Adam and Eve, the first man and woman who committed the first sin and caused mankind to fall. I wish I could tell you what my initial thoughts were about the story, and what it meant, and even my thoughts about Adam and Eve in general, but I wouldn't be able to tell you if I tried. I just learned that they existed, and it's because of them that humanity was polluted by sin and death and why people go to hell. I can't remember when I officially learned about hell, but I was young, probably around 6, and it was completely normal for me. I wasn't scared of the concept of being tossed into a pit of burning darkness for not being a good enough person, or for not believing in God. I thought it was justified. It's a horrifying thing that a child that young thinks that such agonizing torment is not only justified, but deserved. I agree that there are people that deserve hell. Genocidal dictators, serial killers, rapists, CEOs that care more about their 5th yacht than their hungry employees, but my current belief is that their hell is nothing. Not eternal torment. Not burning or impaling or ripped apart by demons. Nothing. Complete and utter isolation, where you have no choice but to think about the things you've done, the people you've hurt. Eons upon eons upon eons, with nobody but your own thoughts. But when I was little, I bought into the fire and brimstone idea of hell, and I wasn't even raised with super fundamentalist ideals. If anything, I was on the milder side of Christianity. My parents let me hang out with people that weren't Christian. I was allowed to watch movies and read books that were from secular creators. Hell, they read us Harry Potter before bed, something a hardcore fundie would never do. So while I was in an echo chamber, I wasn't completely in a bubble. I had knowledge of the outside world, and that led to a lot of difficult internal struggles down the line. When I was in about 2nd grade, I was introduced to the idea that people who didn't believe in God were either terrible sinners or naive people that needed to be shown the light. And I learned that other religions have it wrong, and that Christianity is the only proper way to live life. Even more, someone else's religion should dictate how we treat them. If they weren't Christian, then we could still be friends with them, but our primary goal was to make them convert rather than finding genuine connection with another human being. And if you were in love with someone who wasn't a Christian, forget it. Too many conflicts of interest, too many differences, too much trouble. There was even an episode of Adventures in Odyssey where one of the main characters, Connie, has a romance with the boy in her class who isn't a Christian. And there's a whole dramatic breakup scene, and Connie specifically says that she doesn't want her crush to accept Jesus for her, that he has to accept him for himself. It made sense to me. I didn't question it. I was the kind of Christian kid that fundies dream of. I listened and absorbed everything. Throughout my entire education as a Christian from 1st to 12th grade, I was told 3 major things. Anyone who isn't a Christian is wrong and evil, and that as a Christian it was my mission in life to convert as many people to Christianity as I could, and that the world was constantly against me because I was a Christian. I was very much taught the ideal that we are God's defense against a dark and sinful world. Something really messed up is that I remember being taught that if it came down to denying God or being killed, I was meant to choose death. I was taught this as a 1st grader. I don't care who you are. Telling a 6-year-old that people want to kill you because of your faith and that you should let them is messed up, and we all know it. 2nd grade is when things really kicked into high gear in terms of practicing the religion. That was the year I was taught about the 10 Commandments, as well as having to receive the Sacrament of Reconciliation and the Sacrament of Eucharist. For those of you who weren't raised in a denomination that practices the sacraments, bear with me, this is a bit difficult to explain. A sacrament is essentially a rite of passage at different times in a Christian's life. There are 7 in total with 3 categories. Sacraments of initiation are baptism, where you're cleansed of original sin shortly after birth or when you decide to convert; Eucharist, when you take communion for the first time, the sip of wine and the little flavorless wafers, which is usually around age 8, and confirmation, which is pretty much the Christian version of a bar or bat mitzvah, becoming an adult in the church, which happens around the age of 14. The sacraments of healing are reconciliation, which is when you confess your sins to a priest for the first time, also around age 8, and anointing of the sick, which is only a sacrament you get when you're too ill to go to church. Finally, there are the sacraments of service, matrimony, aka marriage, and holy orders, which is becoming a priest or a nun. The 2 biggest ones were communion/Eucharist and confirmation, but the first reconciliation was also a pretty big deal. We spent half the year preparing for reconciliation and half the year preparing for First Communion. Pretty much 2 Sundays a month, we'd all gather in the church basement with the head of the ministry department and do activities that somehow brought us closer to God. I remember when we were still doing classes for First Communion, we all made bread together, and I wish I asked for that recipe because that was damn good bread. Anyway, my First Communion happened without too much incident. I still have the doll that my Mima gave me that was a mini of me in my communion dress, which she also made. For those of you wondering, yes, I was dressed up like a bride for my First Communion, as were all of the girls in my class. The same can be said for every little girl who's ever received First Communion, and will ever receive First Communion. The boys all wore tuxes, but that was par for the course. The girls were required to wear white, which stood for purity and innocence, and with a veil because covering your hair is a sign of respect or something. At least that's what the internet says. My own personal interpretation is that the community of the church is referred to as the bride of Christ, and having First Communion is supposed to mean that you're officially connected with Jesus or something. Though, if this were the case, it would probably be required to dress as brides for confirmation as well, which is when you're becoming an adult in the church, and thus are officially part of the bride of Christ. But maybe people think that having a bunch of 14-year-old girls dress as brides in a church would probably look pretty sus. Of course, requiring an 8-year-old to dress as a bride is also pretty damn sus, but what can you do? Anyway, back on topic. I had my first reconciliation and my First Communion, and continued my religious education. When I was in 3rd grade, I became an altar server. Usually, altar servers are boys, but my church was cool and progressive, and anyone who wanted to be an altar server could be, and I took that role with pride. Every Sunday I could volunteer to serve, I took it. At the time I told myself it was because I loved church and I loved Jesus just so much that I wanted to serve all the time. But now that I look back, it was probably because I was bored and restless at church. You put a kid with ADHD and autism in an uncomfortable wooden pew and tell her to be quiet for 60 minutes straight, it doesn't end well. So usually having to do something during church rather than just sitting and stewing in my own restlessness was just what I needed. I think Father George, my favorite priest at our church, once asked my dad how I was such a good altar server, and my dad said, "Think of the altar as a stage." Then when I was in 4th grade, I joined the children's choir, which meant when I wasn't serving, I was singing. Naturally, as a theater kid, I signed up for as many solos as they would allow me. Anyway, I continued through Catholic school, and despite the fact that religion class can easily be called indoctrination, I had a really good education. Something that I should definitely note is that in 5th grade was the first time I learned about the Greek goddess Persephone. In art class, we were doing a year-long study of ancient Greek pottery and mosaics and friezes and such. We were given a god or goddess or hero that we would study and make art for throughout the year, and the goddess I was assigned was Persephone. Ever since then, I've been fascinated by her, first as a character, and then as a religious figure, though that comes much later. I always got excited when she was mentioned in a myth, and even after we finished the art projects, I still felt connected to Persephone. I wanted to call her my favorite goddess like she was my favorite character in a story, but for some reason that didn't seem entirely correct. She wasn't my favorite character, she felt like something else. But more on that later. 8th grade was when my faith started to become a lot more complex, as happens to most young adults. As it was with reconciliation and First Communion, we spent the entire year preparing for confirmation. Every Sunday evening from September to May was occupied with meetings and activities and thought exercises and preparing to become an adult in the church. We had to learn about the gifts of the Holy Spirit and the 7 deadly sins and the 7 heavenly virtues and what have you, but it was also when I was first introduced to the idea of deconstructing. I remember about a month before confirmation, we watched a short film called And Then... that showed the different paths a confirmandi can take. The faith was represented by an enormous Bible, like size of a treasure chest big, and a lot of the kids stopped carrying their Bibles because they got too hard to carry. But there was this one girl who walked into a church carrying her Bible only to find 2 priests arguing. The argument gets heated, and in a fit of rage, the girl throws her Bible on the ground and storms out of the church. We were meant to emulate the boy who used his Bible as a toolbox, opening it up to take out a tire crank when someone has a flat or a spare dress when someone else's gets ruined, but the one that stuck with me the most was that girl. I didn't think she was wrong. In fact, I felt sorry for her. She looked lost and angry, and I wanted to comfort her. But I also knew that the way I was supposed to comfort her would be to try and bring her back to Christ. And for some reason, that option made me feel terrible. Like I would have to force her to endure more pain. Of course, I'd been taught suffering led to virtue, so perhaps that wasn't too far off the mark. Either way, this was the first real time I questioned Christianity. Not necessarily questioning my faith, but questioning the institution of the church. Middle school was also when my BPD started to get worse. Puberty was not kind to me emotionally, and when paired with the you're all sinners mentality I was taught, it didn't make for a very good time. Despite the fact that I went to a more progressive church/school, there was the emphasis on the fact that all of humanity are sinners, and that was only enforced harder when I got to high school. Learning about the 7 deadly sins only worsened my self-hatred, because a hormonal teenager is going to have different energy levels than a young child, which made me think I was slothful. It also made me hungrier, which made me think I was a glutton. And, of course, practically every teenager starts to get horny around this age, and I thought that I was being lustful when I was supposed to remain pure until marriage, and how even having lustful thoughts was sinful. I thought that I was the worst kind of person. I thought I deserved hell. I was a teenager and thought that I deserved to suffer for all of eternity because of things that were perfectly normal for someone my age. I graduated from middle school in 2013 and started at a Catholic all-girls high school. This was the same school that did the summer stock productions I talked about in my theater story times. It was a pretty high-end school, so I got a really good education there as well, but since it was a Catholic education, we were still required to take religion classes. Something that we weren't required to do was attend prayer service every morning before class, but I was desperate to prove that I was good enough to be worthy of God's love, so I went every morning. I wish I could say it was a genuine desire for God, but truthfully, I think it's because I wanted to copy my friend, and because I wanted to be thought of as a good Christian. I may have mentioned that BPD makes it hard to form your own identity, so I confused forming my own identity with copying someone that I really liked. Or perhaps a deeper reason. I was hoping that doing the motions would eventually lead to a genuine connection to my faith. So I was what Mama J called a chapel rat. Now, in middle school, the religion classes were pretty par for the course. Learning about the parts of the Mass and the sacraments, learning about the saints, fairly basic stuff. High school religion class got much further into the nitty-gritty details about the faith and the institution. Except for freshman year. Freshman year was spirituality of the body, aka sex ed. Thankfully, my state requires proper sex education, so I wasn't given the usual you don't need to know talk that most Christian teens get. Pretty much the sex ed I did get was, this is what sex is, these are all the parts of the body, this is how pregnancy works, don't you dare have sex before marriage, if you have sex before marriage you lose all your worth as a woman and you are a filthy Jezebel. Okay, it wasn't that intense, but it may as well have been. We were told that our virginity was a special gift that was meant to be saved for our husband. We were given all the typical metaphors. The chewed up stick of gum, the tape that loses its stickiness, the chocolate bar that has a bite taken out of it, the dirty sneakers that have been worn by the entire football team, and we were taught about all the STDs we'd get if we had sex before marriage. Even better, my religion teacher was really homophobic. So not only were we being told that if we had sex before marriage, we'd essentially lose all of our value, but she also taught us that if we started to have feelings for another girl, we were an abomination in God's eyes, and that every urge like that needed to be ignored or tamped down. At least she didn't subscribe to the idea that we were no longer pure if we'd been sexually assaulted, but she did tell us that we were responsible for dressing modestly to not lead good God-fearing men astray. We were 14. We couldn't even drive yet, and we were being told that older men would look at us with predatory intent unless we covered up, and that if we didn't cover up, then we were the ones not acting godly, not the older men creeping on the teenage girls. My BPD made it really hard to think critically about most things, but especially in terms of spirituality. My faith only continued to deteriorate as I journeyed through high school, but I was too far into my own head to even notice. Or perhaps I did notice, and I just didn't want to admit it to myself. I went to chapel, I prayed, I listened to the gospel, I attended every optional lunchtime mass every Friday, I even signed up to be a peer minister, pretty much the holiest students in the school. We organized retreats, we planned all of the school masses, helped with any religious assemblies. Pretty much every time there was something to do with God or Jesus, the peer ministers were behind it. Even the non-religious school events had the peer minister's fingerprints all over them, such as the freshman orientation. I convinced myself that I was fully connected to God and that my faith was unshakable. But that was it. It was only on the surface, skin deep. And I didn't realize how hollow that was until my senior year. Specifically Kairos. Kairos was a religious retreat that was held 3 times a year, and every student had to participate in order to walk at graduation. 4 days of small group discussions, activities, trust exercises, and masses. I think the saying of the retreat was, doubt the first, cry the second, trust the third, live the fourth. Live the fourth was the biggest part of the motto. Pretty much, leave the Kairos retreat and continue the ideals that you've learned, continuing to live what you've learned after the 4th day. And it was on this retreat that everything started to come crashing down. I remember sitting with my small group, and we were tasked with saying something we loved about each person in our group, and rather than going with sincere words, I went into writer mode. And I gave everyone a lovely speech about how unique they were, but it felt like I was reading from a script. I looked inside myself and just felt empty. And that feeling only grew worse when I realized that that was exactly how my faith had been since the beginning. Hollow. Even with all the work I'd put into trying to get close to God, there was nothing there. Now that I noticed it, it was impossible not to. That realization came on the 3rd day of the retreat, and I spent the rest of the time in utter denial. I thought it was just a bad day, and things would feel normal again soon. But the next morning, it still hadn't gone away. So I tried to talk to my friend Eva, who was probably the most spiritually enlightened person in our entire class. But I got the same kind of talk I always did about letting God in and listening about how his love isn't always obvious. I wanted to believe that this was enough to rekindle something that had never been there, but as the bus pulled away from the retreat and started to drive back to school, I tried to tell myself that I was moving forward. I didn't want to admit that nothing had changed. This empty feeling of disconnect continued all throughout the rest of the year, and I continued to just go through the motions. I kept hoping that if I did what I was supposed to, the connection and the fullness and truth that everyone else felt with their faith would come easily to me. But no matter what I tried, there was nothing there. A metaphor that Mama J was fond of was that God frequently sent us love letters, and we had to recognize them in order to have a fulfilling relationship with him. My response to that was that I knew that God was sending me love letters, but I didn't know where my mailbox was. Or, if I ever found my mailbox, I didn't have the key to unlock it. Even worse, with every person I asked to help me with my crisis of faith, every answer I got was a variation of the fact that it was my fault that my faith wasn't strong enough. One night, I asked God for a specific sign to prove that someone was listening. Not even something pinpointed, just something drawn in the shower steam on the mirror. Just to prove that someone was listening, just to prove that I wasn't alone. When I stepped out of the shower and found nothing, I was devastated. But the answer I received from one of the priests at my church was that I shouldn't be testing God, and that I should be trusting him instead. The problem was that I'd been trusting him, and that trust was frequently bringing me nothing but heartbreak. My efforts to deepen my faith only served to throw me deeper into my own doubts. For example, I was gifted a book of prayers for young women at my confirmation, and there were several prayers that I found myself returning to. Finding my identity in the Lord, when I feel anxious, getting close to God, you are my Father, I feel hopeless, when my prayers have not been answered, consume me with your fire, and Lord, don't let me be lukewarm, among others. There were 3 in particular that I came back to constantly, reading one of, if not all 3 of them, practically every night before bed, in some vain attempt to get me closer to God. When I feel anxious, I feel hopeless, and Lord, don't let me be lukewarm. That last one was the one that I returned to the most, but the first 2 told me that, by having anxiety and depression, 2 clinically diagnosed mental illnesses, I wasn't being a good enough Christian. I was supposed to seek out God for everything, so if I was feeling anxious about things in life, it was because my faith in God wasn't strong enough. I wasn't trusting that God would provide, so by having anxiety, I was committing a sin. When I was feeling hopeless and numb, It was because I wasn't letting the joy of God into my life enough. I wasn't opening myself to true joy, so by having depression, I was committing a sin. But the one about not being lukewarm was the one that hit me the hardest. I was under the impression that desire for true faith was not the same as having true faith. Because I felt so disconnected to God while still being someone of the faith, I wasn't giving myself fully to God while also not pulling away. In other words, I was lukewarm. No matter how hard I prayed, no matter how many times I went to confession, no matter how much I volunteered, my faith wasn't getting any hotter, my anxiety wasn't getting any better, and my depression wasn't getting any weaker. In my eyes, this made me a sinner of the worst kind. In Revelations 3:16, it said that those with lukewarm faith will be chewed and spat from the mouth of God, and I believed that this was my ultimate fate. That's what I think is the saddest part about my story. The fact that a young adult, barely out of high school, was so far deep into her own self-doubt that she felt that she was doing something wrong by having anxiety. Mental illness was a sin to me. And to everyone who is just racing to the comments ready to tell me that it's my fault that my faith wasn't strong enough, that I'm blaming God or the church for my own shortcomings, before you start to sharpen your pitchforks, take a step back and think about it head on. I had been in the faith since I was born. I had been dedicated to being the best Christian I could be, because that's what I was told I was supposed to want. When I realized it wasn't what I wanted, I did everything I could to make myself want it, to the point that I even faulted myself for being sick. And these feelings didn't go away until after I left Christianity. In many cases, it hasn't gone away at all. So do me a favor. Ask yourself why you're so willing to blame a child for not having perfect faith because she was diagnosed with mental illness instead of examining why you think illness being a sin is normal. Eventually, I graduated from high school and went to college. The first time I wasn't in a specifically religious education since kindergarten, but I was still lost in the sauce and I did everything I could to try and get back to what I thought I had. I went to on-campus Bible study, I joined the Christian Student Union, I went to on-campus Mass even though it conflicted with Improv Club, I even joined the on-campus choir and went to church off-campus when I could. But none of it worked. Even when I asked one of the other students in Bible study to give me private spiritual counseling, nothing worked, and I only began to grow more desperate. Remember my story about meeting my fiancé? They were one of the few non-Christians I talked to about my faith struggles. I figured I wasn't getting anywhere with the people in my faith, so hopefully someone from outside looking in would be able to offer some insight that I didn't have. They talked about how they often felt God just by sitting in their synagogue or by sitting in nature. The way they described God and feeling God was so much different than how I'd heard it described before. Quote, God is like a spirit, but also a feeling. God is life itself. God is consciousness. Therefore, the universe is God. God is everywhere. God is one. End quote. I had never heard God being referred to as anything but a concrete being, though at the same time not concrete. Endless and always, but also with a discernible personality. It was all too conflicting to make sense, and the only reason it even made sense to me was I'd been born into it and raised not to question it. But I'd never heard of God being solely consciousness or solely the universe rather than being everything and the creator of everything. It actually made sense to me. And that fact terrified the hell out of me, because it was the antithesis of what I've grown up with. But I wanted more than anything to feel that kind of connection that they had. So we sat in the churchyard, with them wearing their tallis. Side note, their tallis is gorgeous, by the way, and me wearing my crucifix. They looked so at peace and so sure. And they were also dealing with mental health and physical health problems, so for them to look so peaceful like that was a big deal. And me? I felt nothing. The wind brushed my hair, the sound of the waves from the river reached my ears, the sunlight shone on my face. It was a perfect day. And I was completely numb. We sat there for over an hour before I started crying and gave up. That was around the time I stopped going to church. I figured that if God didn't want me, then I shouldn't keep trying to force a relationship with someone that had already decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Ironically enough, it was watching Good Omens that finally helped me decide it was time to step away. I related to the character of Aziraphale more than I wanted to admit, and specifically him agreeing that he and Crowley were on their own side resonated with me. I was on my own side, and I was the only one that would always be on my side no matter what. This line of thinking started me down the path of looking critically at the religion that raised me. I thought of all the things that were supposedly sins. Working a specific job, consuming a specific kind of media, dressing a certain way, all of these simple things were referred to as bad, not because they caused harm, but simply because the Christian God didn't like them. I also found it ridiculous that only God was the source of true joy, and any joy that didn't come directly from God was a sin. My perspective was that if God truly loved us and wanted us to be happy, it didn't matter where our joy came from. If it didn't hurt the people around us, and if it didn't hurt the environment, then calling it a sin made no sense to me. I also started to examine how different my views as a Christian were from what a Christian was supposed to think. The most potent example of this is my views on the LGBTQ+ community. When I learned what being gay meant, I truly didn't think it was that big of a deal. And when I learned that the vast majority of Christians think that being gay is an abomination of the highest degree, I thought it was the dumbest thing I had ever heard. As I said, I grew up in a more progressive branch of Christianity, and my parents never once subscribed to the homophobia that many Christians do. But it still didn't erase the fact that the religion they brought me into held the belief that people like me were destined to go to hell because of how they were born, because of how God made them. I also started to think about how many regulations and restrictions Christians have versus other religions. Sure, there were things in other religions that were restricted that I didn't understand, and still don't. For example, I don't understand why cows are sacred to Hindus or pigs are unclean to Muslims or Jews. But I also know that those aren't rules for me to understand, because I'm not Hindu, Muslim, or Jewish. But what I do know is that there are restrictions to Christianity that I told myself made sense, but in actuality really didn't. For example, not being able to date someone who wasn't a Christian. As a kid, I thought it made sense, but as a young adult, who was starting to fall in love with her AFAB Jewish friend, I thought it was stupid. I also thought about just how much Christianity had taken from Judaism while also completely bastardizing it. For example, Christians have the 10 Commandments that aren't even theirs and put far too much stock into them as a system of laws. See every news report where a Bible thumper is demanding that the 10 Commandments be posted in every government building ever, while also practicing them differently than how they were initially supposed to be taken into practice, such as keep holy the Sabbath day. To Jews, the Sabbath is Saturday. To Christians, the Sabbath is Sunday. Why is that? And why are the most important rules about honoring God? Thou shalt not kill is the 5th one on the list, but not having other gods before the Abrahamic one takes top priority. Rape isn't even on the list. And that was another thing that really rubbed me the wrong way. How women were meant to take accountability for men's thoughts and men's actions. Women were meant to be pure, while also being the perfect submissive partner for men. We weren't meant to be heard, only seen. We were only allowed to serve our husbands, and if someone committed sexual violence against us, it was our fault. I hated how backwards the logic of Christianity was now that I was taking a better look at it. The anger-inducing irony here is that I went to an all-girls school that made specific emphasis on educating empowered, independent women, when that's the antithesis of what the Bible says a woman should be. The contradictions also drove me insane. Some said that Christianity was meant to change and evolve as all religions and societies do. Some say that change is bad and that Christianity should still hold the ideals it had back in the 1st century. Some say that some change is good and other change is bad, without highlighting why those changes were good or bad. And the worst part was, they were all supposedly wrong. If there is only one correct answer to a question, then every other answer is wrong. But nobody knew which was the correct answer, because they all assumed that they're the ones that have it right. What bothered me the most was just how little Christians seem to care about the legitimate criticisms of the faith. Anytime someone points out something that is harmful or abusive about Christianity, their claims are simply dismissed as church hurt, or they're told that they don't understand Christianity or that they were never a true Christian. Well, I was a true Christian. I was a true Christian for 20 years. And if being a true Christian means turning people away simply because they don't fit what you think being a human being is, if being a Christian means avoiding accountability and answering debates with hostility and arguments and dismissals, then I don't want to be a true Christian. I'd rather spend eternity in hell, loving my fellow men, than go to heaven because I say they should be different. It wasn't all one moment. It was a culmination of many smaller moments that finally resulted in me saying this isn't right for me. This has never been right for me, and it never will be. And trying to make myself fit into a box that wasn't meant for me was slowly killing me. My writing was a source of comfort for me in these times, especially in the Good Omens fanfiction I wrote called Shelter from the Storm. That's linked in the description below. It's about how Crowley and Aziraphale take in a pregnant teenager, a runaway from an abusive fundamentalist family. Writing this story really helped me process my feelings about the faith that raised me. It helped me to see that there are good people that call themselves Christians out there, and that there are genuinely good parts of Christianity. But it also helped me realize that while the faith itself isn't completely and inherently bad, it also wasn't for me. So around the end of my senior year in college, I decided I would no longer call myself a Christian. It was difficult, but it was also the first true freedom I had felt in my soul for a very long time. Contrary to what people think when I tell them I'm a former Christian, I'm not an atheist. I've deconstructed, but I also do believe in the Abrahamic God. though I know that the version of them I was raised with is very different from who they actually are, and I don't think I'll ever be able to truly know them because of how I was raised, which is rather sad now that I think of it. But I wasn't right for the Abrahamic God, and the Abrahamic God wasn't right for me. This left me in a very interesting situation. I had carried the label of Christian since my birth, and this was the first time in my life that I was no longer wearing that label. Perhaps I would have come to my own spiritual conclusion eventually, but there was one person that accelerated my faith journey. Emma, aka White Hair Knits, aka Whitewood ASMR. Go check her out, she's awesome. Both her channel and her shop are in the description below. I met Emma because I purchased a hat and a set of fingerless mitts from her Etsy shop, and I sent her an Instagram DM asking about what pattern she used, and we quickly became friends after that. Emma is a witch. She was the very first witch I'd ever met. Well, the first witch that told me she was a witch. It's very possible that I had met others in my life, but I was looking through life with the lens of a Christian. I didn't know someone could be a witch. I didn't even think witchcraft was a thing outside of the movies. To me, magic was waving a stick and pretending it was a wand, or pouring out all the shampoos in the bathroom sink to make potions. But when I learned that there were people that practiced magic and called themselves witches in real life, it immediately sparked something inside me. Ever since I was a kid, I always loved pretending to be a witch. My style of dress was very cottagecore witchy, and it still is. And I'm pretty sure if I knew I could become a witch, I would have started practicing as soon as I realized how fake my Christian faith really was. So shortly after I graduated from college, I began calling myself a witch. The journal I'd been given as a graduation present became my first book of shadows. I'm currently on volume 6. I bought my first book of spells from Target, and that collection has only grown. I've found more fulfillment in 1 year of practicing witchcraft than 20 years as a Christian. Magic brought me back to life. Though I won't pretend that it was perfect after that. 20 years of toxic ideology had left me with some very unhealthy thoughts about myself and the world around me, and having BPD means I feel everything with so much more intensity than someone without. I even had a phase that I'm not proud of where I thought all Christians were evil, and nothing anyone said could convince me that Christianity was anything other than propaganda and slavery. My outlook towards the religion is much more stable now, but I can't say that I don't find the religion a little bit abusive. Even when I had cut all ties from Christianity, I was still scared that I was damning myself to hell for being a witch. Something I didn't even believe in was a very real fear for me because I had been told since I was 6 that if I walked away from God, I was committing the worst kind of sin and deserved the worst kind of punishment. Many people consider this worry a sign that I am meant to be a Christian and that God is trying to call me back. What you say is a calling, I say is abuse. I didn't want to stop being a witch because of a genuine desire to be a Christian. I wanted to stop being a witch because I was worried I would be punished for going after what made me genuinely happy. And the thing is, I didn't want to stop being a witch. The desire I have for my practice now is just as strong as it was back when I made my choice. That was another thing that bothered me about Christianity. It wasn't solely about desire to be with God. It was about the desire to avoid hell. Nobody should be forced to love someone or something because they fear what'll happen if they don't. That's not love. That's control. That's abuse. And the community I found through my craft has been infinitely more supportive than Christianity ever was. So I continued to be a witch, even though I was terrified that I was damning myself by choosing my own happiness. But the one line I never had the guts to cross was deity work. Now, a lot of people don't like the term deity work because it feels too casual, but that's the term I heard most before actually delving into the religious side of my craft. The reason why I couldn't cross it was because part of me was still tied to the anxieties that had been forced into me as a Christian. As I mentioned, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me" was the top commandment, and I felt that if I started following another deity, then I truly was turning my back on Christianity, and damning myself to the deepest, darkest, worst pit of hell. What I didn't want to admit to myself was that I was genuinely interested, but I told myself that it was a line I would never cross. I later crossed that line in December of 2024. I think I put it best in my Book of Shadows entry shortly after following my first 5 mothers. April 16th, 2025. This would normally be an entrance for my Book of Mirrors, seeing as this would most likely fall under the category of shadow work. But I figured I should put this in my Book of Shadows instead. First thing I should address, I don't know why I'm so drawn to these deities. I can give a reason for a surface-level interest, but not for the deep connection I feel. I'll do my best to put it into words, but I can't guarantee that I'll be properly coherent, or that I'll be able to capture everything in my mind, but I'll still do my best. The main thing is that I never thought I'd be doing any kind of deity work. Being raised Christian has put a bunch of different fears in my mind, both about other deities and about witchcraft in general. This has been present since the beginning of my witchcraft journey. In a lot of mainstream Christian media, especially one dealing with other religions and dark practices, Whether they're getting into D&D or occultism, or whether they just don't feel like going to church or being a Christian, period, there's always one. The little lost lamb who thinks she knows better than God, or is too mature to believe in God, or found someone better than God. Whatever the reason, they have turned away. In these stories, one of two things will happen. The lost lamb will repent and turn back to God, or die, usually in either a horrible, gruesome way or by suicide. Back in the early days of my journey, and sometimes still today, I worry that this is what I've become. The lost lamb in some penny dreadful Bible story. For 18 years, it was driven into my head that the Christian God is the only God, and that all who turn away from him and bow to false gods are sinners who will be given divine retribution. And deep down, I'm still really scared that I'm going to hell by continuing to be a witch. But I'm not going to stop. I'm more confident than I've ever been in my life, and I find genuine passion in my craft that I never felt for Christianity. Even more, in Christianity, everything was framed as a test. A relationship with someone who wasn't Christian, being offered a drink at a party, passing by someone who needed a tire change, everything is a test. And if you don't take the righteous path, the path God wants you to take, you fail. Granted, the version of Christianity I was raised with is far more lax than some of the more Bible-thumping variants, but it was hardly freedom. It was still taught that I should be selfless in all things, that I should show gratitude and loyalty to God no matter what, that every instance of my life, my every action, my every word, my every thought was meant to glorify God. And as a hormonal perfectionist teen with undiagnosed BPD and more intrusive thoughts than you can shake a stick at, that hit me really hard. I used to think Christianity was freedom, that it was joy, mostly because everything else was framed as a bad thing. True joy was meant to come from God and everything else was false joy. A quote from a PureFlix film I was shown in junior year at Holy Cross likened living in sin to a cozy, decorated prison cell. You don't realize you're in a cage until the door is closed, that you don't realize the comfort and the decadence is all a trap until it's too late. Messages like these are the reason why I was so nervous to take up deity work. Maybe in my head, the part of me that still subscribed to Christianity, I reconciled that God wouldn't be angry with my craft, but working with another deity was crossing the line. One of the big problems with Christianity, in my opinion, aside from the corruption and harm that has built up in the religion over time, is that it's too widespread. Religion is a very personal thing, and forcing too many people into one box only leads to disaster, especially since it spreads so wide that there are different kinds of Christianity. Heck, I say I was raised Christian for simplicity's sake, but in particular I was raised Catholic, which is the wrong kind of Christianity to Protestants, which is the wrong kind of Christianity to Baptists, which is the wrong kind of Christianity to Methodists, and the list goes on and on. It's both too vague and too precise, and the wrong move can have you damned for all eternity. A big part of this is the character of the Christian God himself. There's too many contradictions and too much to remember. He's all good and all loving, unless you do something he doesn't like or choose to practice in a particular way. He's fair and just, unless you're not among the chosen people. He's all-powerful and is the one true God above all others, which is why 2/3 of the world didn't know about Christianity until colonizers showed up and forced them to convert. Of course, it's all framed as you needing to choose God as well, so if you get damned to hell, you only have yourself to blame. And of course, all those gaps in logic leave room for humans with selfish or dangerous intentions to heave their influence over the masses while claiming to be working for God. I don't think Christianity is a bad religion, but it has a very long history of corruption, and I believe its core message has been lost. Most of all, I don't believe that an all-powerful but all-loving being who cares for us like a father and wishes for us to be well and whole would want the people following them to do so out of fear or because they think they're nothing without that deity. A quote from VeggieTales of all things can best describe my feelings on Christianity. A gift that's demanded is no gift at all. Giving thanks to God for giving you life, for giving you anything good, because you fear he might take it away isn't gratitude. It isn't love. Saying every good thing in life comes from God and every bad thing is self-inflicted isn't justice. It took me a while to figure out what I want from a relationship with any deity. I don't want a master. A teacher, a guide, a parent, a friend, yes, but not a master. This is why it took so long for me to feel comfortable with deity work. Because I was so used to having a master and I didn't want another one. And because my former deity wanted to be my master and saying I had to choose him or be damned was not a choice. That's why I like my relationship with my 5 mothers. I can leave anytime I want if working with them no longer feels right for me. I have a choice. They don't want me to kneel, they want me to rise. I'm drawn to them in different ways for different reasons, and the relationship I have with all of them is unique. The first deity I was drawn to was the Morrigan. As soon as I first read about her, there was something stirring inside me. At first, I just thought it was mild interest because I do enjoy studying different mythologies and deities, but my draw towards the Morrigan felt different. I don't know how I knew that it was a desire to follow her rather than simply a desire to learn about her, but when I realized it, way too many things started happening in my head. First of all was fear for all of the aforementioned reasons, but also fear that I was starting to get in over my head. If we want to get technical, the Morrigan is the first deity I ever had an independent desire to work with in a religious sense rather than solely a scholarly one. It was a new feeling and it scared the hell out of me. Along with the fear came confusion. The Morrigan is a fearsome, no-nonsense queen of death, battle, and fate, aka the exact opposite of me. I was confused as to why I'd be drawn to such a dark and serious goddess when I'm so breezy and light. And if she was the one calling me, I was utterly lost as to why she'd want someone who was nothing like her to follow her. This is why I'm glad I had, name of a friend, to help me through this. He works with Aphrodite, and he had similar trepidations, but he advised me that if I'm feeling any kind of call, that I shouldn't deny it. At this point in the conversation, I began crying. I wasn't sad or angry or upset in any way, nor was I overcome with emotion of any kind, not that I can recall anyway. There was no explanation, and yet I still found myself physically shedding tears. This has happened a few times when talking or thinking about the Morrigan, so I choose to take it as a sign that she's listening. Something else I recently realized was a sign from her was a swarm of crows that showed up one evening. I was experimenting different times of leaving food out for making friends with the crows, and by the time I was back in my bedroom, there was a whole murder hovering around the deck. I put out food the same time the night after that, but they never came back. What was more, they didn't even take any of the food. To put it in perspective, I only just noticed a reappearing crow friend on the balcony about a month ago. So why did all those crows appear, eat nothing, and then never appear again? I'm aware this is just a God of the Gaps argument, just in a different skin. Essentially, it's using the Christian God as an explanation for things that can't be explained. Why is there lightning? Because of the wrath of God! Oh, it's actually heat and electricity gathered at a central concentrated point? Never mind. What created the universe? God did! Oh, it was actually the Big Bang? Well, what came before the Big Bang? We don't know? Well, then it's definitely God. There may be a logical conclusion for the crows swarming like that, but signs from the Morrigan tend to be cryptid, so I choose to believe in it. It sounds insane, but I think she's helping me become a bit bolder. I was able to stand up to my boss at Joanne's that one time, and I'm getting more confident in myself. I've also been making a lot of progress with my shadow work, and I owe a lot of it to her as well. My second mother is Hecate. My desire to work with her was a bit more subtle to start out with. Ever since I was a kid, I've always loved imagery of the moon, I've always loved dogs, I've always thought torches were really cool, and would sometimes make torches out of construction paper when I was in kindergarten, and I've always been drawn to keys, especially skeleton keys. And when I got a bit older, I was obsessed with learning about Greek mythology, the history of witchcraft like the Salem witch trials, and would make up a lot of games where I was a witch or some other kind of magic user. I don't think she, quote, called me, per se. Perhaps she was always there and simply made herself known when I was ready to begin deity work. With my third mother, Persephone, it was a bit of the same, but not entirely the same situation. I felt a particular connection with Persephone since I was in 5th grade, when we were studying the ancient Greek artwork. When we came into the art classroom the day we began the Greek study, there were index cards with names and pictures of different gods, goddesses, heroes, or demigods, and the one we were closest to would be our focus and subject of art for the semester. The index card that was closest to my seat was the one with Persephone's name. Ever since then, I've been interested in her, and similar to Hecate, she was there waiting when I was ready for deity work. My fourth mother is Lilith. This is the mother that I have the rockiest history with, because of my road to accepting her as my mother, as can be read in my previous entries. It wasn't until I read the scathing reason for Lilith being a banned topic in the r/pagan subreddit that I wanted to work with her, and of course that sparked a lot of cognitive dissonance, which was only made worse by Z expressing their discomfort in my working with her. I'm not sure if I ever wrote the end of that saga down here, but eventually they opened up to the idea after doing a lot of their own self-reflection. They came to the conclusion that all religions grow and change all the time, and that includes the beings that make up the lore. To them, Lilith's energy as a being now was nothing like the energy had when she first appeared. And they also came to the conclusion that deities and other supernatural entities are what you make of them. My final mother is Bridget. She's been on my radar since my trip to Ireland in 2019, when Mom got herself a St. Bridget's cross, which is still hung up by the front door. When I was getting into my witchcraft journey, and was doing research on different branches of paganism and Wicca and other mystical practices, I learned that Bridget started out as a pagan goddess before being absorbed by Christianity and made into a saint. At first I was hesitant to work with her, because I thought that I'd just keep collecting deities until I overwhelmed myself unless I stopped. But my desire to work with her remained until I acknowledged her as my mother. This is also when I started calling them as such. I think it's fitting that Bridget is my final mother. The one who started as a saint in my eyes, seeing as I was raised Christian, who held my hand as I bridged, the divide between my Christian past and my pagan present. When I was ready to call myself a pagan, Bridget was there as the goddess she always was, though now I could see the real her. As with all deities, as with all religions, I can't say for certain that my interpretations of them are correct, but they're what feel right to me. To me, they each play a distinct role and have distinct personalities. Bridget is my gentle mother, the one I turn to when I'm in need of comfort and warmth. This isn't to say that she coddles me, or that my other mothers aren't comforting when I seek them out, but Bridget is the one with the gentlest touch. She's also the only one that isn't considered a, quote, dark goddess, who have an untrue reputation of being dangerous and wrathful, and a true reputation of requiring hard work of the soul and self of their followers. Not that Bridget is simple, not in the slightest, but she is my simple comfort when I need to be held, my fire that helps me to shine, and a guiding hand in my creative pursuits. Lilith is my wild mother, the one that bids me to run barefoot through the grass, to laugh far too loud. She's helping me find the confidence and courage to undo all the toxic teachings of Christianity. She's sexually confident in a world that expects women to be pure. She's extreme in a world that expects women to be demure. She encourages me to take up space, to learn to put myself first and not feel like a sinner because of it. I also feel a kinship to her as a being that was originally labeled as evil. I know how it feels to be an outcast, and I know how it feels to be dismissed. I also feel a connection with her because of what happened with Sean. In a lot of versions of Lilith's mythology, she's the first wife of Adam, but refused to submit to him. Now, submit has been interpreted a few different ways. Some say that Adam didn't like being on the bottom during sex and wanted to be on top all the time. I don't think this is the reason why she left, but I think this might have been the straw that broke the camel's back. Another popular interpretation is that she would sometimes refuse Adam when he wanted sex. Adam was convinced that Lilith owed him sex as his wife. Perhaps she left because she was tired of being a sex doll for someone else's satisfaction. I feel a connection to this story and to Lilith because it's similar to my relationship with Sean. She's also been referred to as a patron of rape and abuse survivors, and as a protector of women and bodily autonomy. There's been a lot of discourse about how her Jewish origin make her an off-limits entity for other religions, and that propping up a demon known for causing miscarriages and killing babies as a patron of abortion/abortion rights is insulting. But to me, a demon or goddess is what you make of them. I was in need of a mother who would teach me to be wild, and Lilith stepped in. Persephone is my multifaceted mother. This doesn't mean that my other mothers are simple or one-dimensional. Oh no, not at all. But Persephone is the only one that has two natures that actively contradict each other. The life-giving and cheery goddess of spring, and the terrifying queen of the underworld and death. Yet she doesn't contradict herself. Her nature is not either or, it's and. She is both death and life. She is wholly and unapologetically herself. She teaches me to embrace all parts of myself. My four, quote, dark mothers are known to be patrons of shadow work, but I feel it as a connection for both the Morrigan and Persephone. My silliness, my sadness, my sensitivity, all are parts of me. Every aspect of me, while not all good, are all sacred. She helps me come to peace with all parts of myself. I simply feel close to her. She helps me find my identity, which is really helpful for someone with BPD. But aside from that, my relationship with her is pretty chill. To me, Persephone seems like a very chill deity. Someone who will do the hard work if needed, but also enjoys just vibing. I also have the personal belief that she's the biggest meme lord of the group. Hecate is my wise mother. Again, my other mothers aren't stupid in the slightest, but Hecate is the most scholarly. She feeds my desire for learning, my curiosity, my cleverness and creativity, and of course my love for witchcraft. Most people see Hecate as a stern, no-nonsense woman, but I don't see her that way. She isn't as chill as Persephone, but she is pretty chill herself. She enjoys fun, but mostly is one for studying and building her craft. She's hardly simple, but there isn't much that I need to say about her. She simply speaks for herself. She guides me and feeds my mind. The Morrigan is my strong mother. The real no-nonsense goddess. She's the one that drives me the hardest, mostly because confrontation and standing my ground aren't things I'm very skilled at. She helps me stand firm and stand with confidence, even when I stand alone. She isn't easy on me, but I don't want her to be. She shows me the parts of myself that need help, that need to be changed. But it's up to me to fix them. But she doesn't just throw me into the deep end and expect me to swim. She's just as diligent a teacher as Hecate, though her lessons are much harsher. She doesn't do so to be mean, but to make me stronger, to lift me up, to help me lift myself. She's harsh, but she's fair. And she does care. She isn't warm or cuddly, but she is loving. Sometimes it's easy to forget that love isn't always soft. End quote. However, there is one figure in my hearth pantheon that's been left unaccounted for. Eve. Music has been a part of my practice for a very long time, even before I realized the major role it played. The song Don't Cry for Your Daughters, Eve by Lydia the Bard, probably my favorite song, first showed up on my radar around October of 2020. And it quickly burrowed into my head and wouldn't leave. Tina, my coworker from Joann Fabrics, RIP, can attest that I was frequently singing it while working my shifts. And this song got me thinking critically about Eve as a figure for the first time in my life. She'd been someone I was aware of since I was 6 years old, but I never really could cement how I felt about her. The song evolved from being an earworm to being a constant companion, and there was also this intense feeling in the pit of my gut. I've never been able to explain what it means clearly, but I've always said that whatever it is, it's real and it's strong. Something in the very pit of my being trying to tell me something. It usually would appear when listening to songs or reading poetry or stories, works of art that moved me deeply, but I'd never felt it this strongly. Once again, I'll let my past self explain. Friday, May 9th, 2025, 3:30 p.m. Yesterday when I was driving home from work, I had the urge to listen to one song over and over again, which I'm starting to think means something, especially if it's a song that makes me feel some particularly strong emotions. This time the song was Don't Cry for Your Daughters, Eve, by Lydia the Bard. Two particular things happened during this drive. The song made me think about an idea for a plotline I had for Emma's and My Story. The main character witnesses a witch burning and feels horribly guilty for not saying anything. As soon as I think about this, I start crying, but not because I was sad, not to begin with at least, but I actually had to pause the song to cry. I felt a lot of emotions that I couldn't exactly put into words. Kind of how like I started crying when I realized the Morrigan was calling me. Kind of, but not exactly. The other thing, as I drove past IKEA and was about to get on the exit ramp off the Beltway, there was a break in the overcast sky, and a little bit of blue and pink were visible, and there was a strand of cloud broken off from the gray that looked like an arm or an extended hand. Here's a picture. Later that night, I felt the urge to listen to the song again. I don't remember how many listens I did, nor do I remember the order of events, but I noted as best as I could. As always, there were faces floating through the blackness that my brain interpreted as female faces as I listened. One thing that I remember from the first listen was that during the bridge, my mind conjured the idea/image of myself walking through a forest, but as the music picked up, I started to run. I looked up and saw what looked like a person with wings, flying, which immediately made me think of Lilith. At one point, I saw what looked like a flower blooming. I also saw different animals. A horse, a goat, a cow, I think, and a butterfly. Though the butterfly was at a different time than the other animals, which could mean that it carried a message of a bit more significance. I also pictured the reaching hand cloud and myself reaching for it. My right hand felt a strange kind of cold yet lukewarm energy. I also saw the winged person again, holding the hand of another not winged person as they flew together. At this point, my body was feeling both numb and yet still had feeling. I was aware of what was happening around my body, but was trying too hard to focus on spirit that I think it sent me a little bit out of balance. My body was going through a lot too, tensing and untensing, the strong feeling starting from my gut and floating outward. At one point, my jaw got tired and I let it drop. I imagined the song and my own breath drifting from my lips. At random points, I also saw flashing lights from all different directions. At one point, I felt the sheet on top of my legs rustle from something that felt like a hand. The energy in my body began to concentrate to my third eye and then to my crown. Then my throat. My hands felt like they were raised on two humps, and I felt a random chill on my shoulders and arms, and then a random heat a bit later. Then one listen, about halfway through, I sank back into my body, though my throat and my third eye chakra felt very tingly for a while after. Someone in the occultism Discord server recommended focusing on my solar plexus chakra, since that seems to be where my energy usually concentrates, and I'm inclined to believe that this is a good idea. I might try experimenting next time I meditate. I've been spending a lot of energy trying to go up and outward when maybe I should be going inward. I spent the drive to work listening to the song on repeat again, and I saw a similar reaching hand cloud, though the hand wasn't as detailed. I'm debating on either listening to it again or doing another song tarot pull on my way home. Not sure yet. There could be a number of different meanings, but I think the one speaking to me is either Lilith or Eve herself. Lilith and Eve are united in the front of being wives of Adam, but Lilith has become a supernatural entity, while Eve simply remains a human sinner, responsible for damning humanity, which isn't fair in my opinion. To err is only human, yet Eve is the one who gets all the blame. My personal belief is that Adam was the first one who ate the apple, and then blamed Eve, the lie making the bite of apple catch in his throat, which is why the male larynx is called an Adam's apple. If this really is the case, then the blame Eve has gotten for centuries, the basis of patriarchy in Christianity and the reason why women in religious extremist societies are seen as the lesser sex was built completely on a lie. If Eve is the one reaching out to me, I wonder what she's saying. Maybe she's asking to be one of my mothers. Who's to say? I'll keep my eyes and ears open to see if anything else comes my way. Monday, May 12th, 2025, 3:30 p.m. I still haven't reached a conclusion about Eve. I know she's involved in some significant way, but I don't know what. I did a music tarot pull on my way home on the 8th and spent the weekend reflecting on it. As I said, no concrete conclusion has been reached, but it did give me some insight. First I listened to Don't Cry by Lydia the Bard, which I think I'll do whenever I do a tarot, pick a song that matches what I'm trying to figure it out, and then that'll be the shuffle song. The songs that came after are as follows: Love Lies by S.J. Tucker, Holly, Ivy, and You by Heather Dale, Eshkol by S.J. Tucker, As I Am by Heather Dale, Storybook by Heather Dale, Like an Angel Passing Through the Room, Celtic Woman cover, Witch's Rune, S.J. Tucker, and the last one was Solace, S.J. Tucker. Love Lies by the title sounds like a song about rejection or love gone wrong, but in reality, it's a song about questioning if the listener is the right choice for the singer. For reference, here's the first verse and chorus. Love lies downwind waiting, patiently to be found. All day east wind howling, wailing, angel don't make a sound. Unless you're the one I have been waiting for. You're the one I have been waiting for. It's very much a song that says, I've been through a lot. Don't treat me lightly. Don't approach me unless you're serious. This could be as Eve herself telling me that if I'm serious about her, then she's ready to embrace me, so long as I'm ready to embrace her. The word angel is used to refer to the listener a couple of times. An angel has received the connection solely to Christianity due to cultural osmosis. People think that angels belong only to Christianity, and perhaps Eve is telling me that just as angels don't belong to any one religion or person, neither does she. I think the third verse also deserves some attention, because there's a very almost literal meaning. There is no soul that will swallow me whole, and spit me out shining and beautiful. Spit me out, turnabout's fair play. In love there's loss of control, but like the rivers I roll. Just the way it goes, are you in for the ride? Perhaps Eve is saying she's a complex figure, not the one-dimensional scapegoat most people see her as, but not the shining paragon of enlightenment that some are trying to reframe her as. She doesn't belong to one person, and no one person will belong to her. But she's asking if I'm willing to walk with her. I'd be giving up a bit of control to her, and she'd be giving up a bit of control to me. Turnabout's fair play. In other words, my interpretation is that this is Eve saying she sees me and recognizes me as one of her own. The fact that it came first in the queue definitely counts for something. Holly, Ivy, and You is Heather Dale's telling of the marriage of Tristan and Isolde, who was engaged to Tristan's uncle. The three seek counsel from Guinevere, and she poses a query for the uncle. If she could only be your wife for half the year, would you wed her when the trees are full and green, or when the trees are bare? The uncle picks the winter, because the nights are longer, forgetting that evergreen trees and holly are still green during the winter, meaning that he'd inadequately said that he never wanted to marry Isolde, freeing her to marry Tristan. I remember reading this in Le Morte d'Arthur, but I don't remember if it was Guinevere that posed the test or not, but the test is the same. This song isn't as straightforward, but I suppose no reading, be it music or card or rune, is ever completely straightforward, so I'll do the best I can. The first thing that should be mentioned is that Guinevere is just as controversial a character in the Arthur myth as Eve is in the Bible. Granted, committing adultery isn't necessarily the same as damning all humanity, but the principle is the same, and almost every modern depiction of her has either a shallow, mean girl or a one-dimensional character, which isn't how she's depicted in this song. Heather even describes her as using queenly wisdom when hearing out Tristan and his uncle. Similarly, Eve has been seen in only a negative light since the story first began circulating, but things are rarely as they appear from head on. Coincidentally, this is the same message found in the test. Tristan's uncle is so focused on having Isolde all to himself during the longer nights of the year that he fails to recognize the fact that he's been asked a trick question. Perhaps this is Eve, or somebody else, telling me to look at all angles before making the decision, and being sure to see all sides of Eve, not just the ones I'm used to seeing. Next was Eshkol, which actually isn't a song at all, but a spoken story. It centers around a satyr named Eshkol falling in love with a Selkie. They stay together for 7 years and 7 days before the Selkie becomes restless and feels the need to return to the sea. Eshkol tries to get him to stay, but he explains that he's a Selkie, and what he calls the leaving is simply part of a Selkie's nature. Eshkol reluctantly gives him his heel coat back, and he leaves. Eshkol wanders, heartbroken, until she too reaches the sea, feeling the same wanderlust and need for the leaving that her Selkie did, and she joins the crew of a ship in search of adventure. There's both a theme of embracing one's nature and defying one's nature. To me, it shows that balance is needed. The Selkie forces himself to stay an extra 7 days after the initial 7 years, which is how long Selkies are allowed to stay on land at a time in the mythology. He tries to stay with Eshkol, but denying this part of himself only makes him restless and uncomfortable. But Eshkol defies her own nature and chooses the sea over the forest, which is what most satyrs would choose. Just as it's possible to blindly accept fate or nature, it is possible to blindly deny fate or nature. To say that you're not one way or another solely because you feel the need to reject anything expected of you, even if it's something good or something that you don't want to admit deep down that you want. This is again the theme of not putting people in boxes. Even if someone goes along with something, it should be out of genuine desire, not because they feel they have to. I think this ties back to the duality and complexity of Eve's character that is often overlooked. The one story she's known for is about a mistake she made when she'd only just been created. There are two possible ways to see this. Either she indeed was tricked because she didn't know what sin was or what evil was. She knew she was supposed to listen to God, but it's possible she hadn't yet come to the conclusion that she wasn't aware that listening to the serpent was evil. All she knew was that it was something God had said not to do. Why shouldn't she do it? Not because she knew what sin was and what death was, and that they were two things that needed to be avoided. The only reason she had for not doing it is because God wouldn't like it, because God would punish her if she did. The other interpretation is that Eve was aware of what she was doing, and she did so anyway because she wanted her children to have the enlightenment she lacked. Because she was a human being with a mind, it's almost insulting to put her motivation as she wanted to disobey God or she was wicked by nature, if one considers that she knew what she was doing. No matter how you put it, if Eve was tricked, then there's the angle of using a human's newness and innocence against them. If she was aware, then there's her lack of motivation aside from a mere desire to disobey, which is often found in children. Which, technically speaking, Eve was. We don't know how much time passed between the seventh day when God rested and when Eve ate the apple, so it's very possible that she didn't know what she was doing. Of course, it doesn't completely erase her role in the downfall of man, but to simply dismiss her actions as falling to a sinful nature does her a great disservice as both a human and a character. Of course, I subscribe to the idea that Adam was the first to eat from the tree, and that he blamed Eve, and the lie/bite of apple became lodged in his throat and became his Adam's apple, so that's neither here nor there. And the biggest thing of all is that practically all Bible thumpers quote the original sin to say that women are either wicked by nature or foolish by nature, which they use as a basis for why everything should be run by men. No one person has one set nature. Not every wicked act is done out of wickedness, and not every righteous act is done out of righteousness. The next song was As I Am. I think it should be mentioned that I just added a bunch of Heather Dale and S.J. Tucker songs that I haven't heard before, and out of the 8 songs that came in this shuffle, only 3 were songs that I'd heard more than once, / knew all the words to. I forgot to say that earlier. As I Am is a love song between, I think, Arthur and Guinevere, or at the very least, Arthur. A king is asking someone to love him without all the titles, robes, and crowns, to see him as the person underneath, see him for as he truly is. The song goes on to say what he wants from the listener. I'm not looking for perfection, I'm not offering a saint, I'm not looking for a pretty bird to put in some restraint. Don't take me out of duty, don't take me out of pride, just take me if the man you see is one you'd stand beside. And what he offers them. I offer you a look inside, I offer you that trust. I'm offering an open heart, I'm asking for your hand, and I only ask you take me as I am. I think this ties into the last song. To look past Eve's, quote, nature, and what people say she is, and see her for what she actually is. If she sees a follower or a daughter in me, she wants me to see her clearly, and to understand that following her isn't what most would expect. What she wants is openness, and she gives it in return. Storybook is one I don't think comes from Eve. It's my own feelings about Christianity. It's a breakup song about finding love elsewhere. Perhaps it's my own internal struggle trying to guilt me, or maybe it's a sign that I really am growing and moving on. Quote, you have what you need, and it isn't from me, and it hurts, but it's not a surprise. It should be noted that the word storybook is always said with love behind it. Storybook love. A love that is a literal story, not reality. Most of my positive memories of Christianity come from reading the Bible, or the community that I found in the church. I never put much thought into the toxic connotations behind them, or the predatory and sexist system that Christianity had become. It's not my childhood storybook anymore. I see it and myself for what they are now. And it hurts that the religion I dedicated my entire childhood to caused me such pain. And it's frightening to have to leave it behind. But it isn't what I need anymore. Like an Angel Passing Through the Room is the one I'm having the most trouble with. Perhaps it's meant to represent finding peace with transition and change. Its placement in the queue also reflects this. In between Storybook and Witch's Rune, between the sorrow and trauma of my childhood and the spiritual confidence and discovery of my adulthood. There's also the angel imagery again, returning to the topic of not belonging to one sole people or one sole religion. I think it represents the peace one is meant to find from their religion, because at the end of the day, the only one who can decide what path I follow is me. Everything comes back to me again in the gloom, like an angel passing through my room. Witch's Rune represented my journey to find witchcraft. And finally was Solace, another spoken word story. This one is about the human child of a firebird, and how the people around her are afraid that she'll grow up to be too wild, and she doesn't do things or act the way little girls should. So the firebird entrusts Solace to their friend Sleeve the spider, to help her find what little girls are meant to do. She's first taken to the sirens, feathered creatures that write stories as they dance. Solace dances, but none of what she writes is even remotely legible, so she's then sent to the dancing master, which turns out to be a pair of enchanted shoes. These shoes teach Solace to dance, but once she's learned all the shoes have to teach her, they become possessive and try to keep her feet in them. They say that little girls are meant to grow up and dance with men to become alluring creatures of romance and passion, that the shoes could help Solace become the envy of the town. But Solace manages to escape the dancing master and returns home. The next day, as her firebird father is about to dance as he does every dawn, she asks to dance with him, and she does it in both the way she was taught and in her own way. To me, this is as straightforward as it gets. Follow my own rhythm. The only reason Solace seeks to find out what little girls are meant to do is because the people around her think she isn't normal, and she needs to be like her peers. She tries to dance with the sirens, but they dismiss her because she isn't doing it right. And dancing with the dancing master, while it does teach her more about what she's passionate about, also tries to make her sacrifice who she is. The shoes hurt her under the guise of helping her, whether they're aware they're hurting her or not. All around, people are telling her that she's not what she's meant to be, but she finds her joy in herself and embraces it. I'm the kind of person that finds comfort in labels, but not in structure. I like calling myself a witch. I like calling myself a pagan. And I like calling myself a daughter of the Morrigan, of Lilith, of Hecate, Brigid, Persephone, and now possibly Eve. From my understanding, nobody has done any kind of deity work with Eve. I use deity in quotes because she's not a goddess. And that if there are any that do, we're few and far between. Even more, the one person that commented on my post about working with Eve in the r/pagan subreddit suggested that I try Gnosticism, which I don't want to call myself. Why can't a pagan work with Eve? Why can't Eve be an entity for spiritual following? Why does everything have to be so neatly outlined? In my opinion, religion should come down to the individual. If one can find community that worships the same way you do, that's fantastic. But one shouldn't be shamed if their practice is any different from those around them. So what's my conclusion in all this? I think the first 4 songs are what Eve wants to tell me about following her, and the last 4 are what the universe is trying to tell me about myself. I think I'm going to proceed with calling Eve my mother from now on. One of the comments in my Reddit post likens the use of non-deities in deity work to praying to a saint in Catholicism. And honestly, I kind of agree. As I said, religion should be up to the individual. I can pick up pieces of what I want my faith to look like as I go. End of entry. And that's been my Hearth Pantheon ever since. Honestly, I've felt more at peace calling myself a pagan than I've ever felt calling myself a Christian. And it feels much more real because it's something I've built. I'm the kind of person that thrives off systems and patterns, especially systems and patterns that I recognize. But systems that I've built feel so much more personal. And I like how my Hearth Pantheon has symmetry on all sides, and coordinates with the 5 elements, the cardinal directions, and the central parts of my body. Hecate is the mother of East, and air, and the mind, the intellectual side of the metaphysical. Brigid and Lilith are mothers of South and fire. Brigid is the mother of the heart, Lilith mother of the left-hand path. The Morrigan, west and water, and mother of the eyes, the metaphysical side of the intellectual. Finally, Persephone and Eve, north and earth. Persephone is the mother of my soul, Eve the mother of the right-hand path. And I'm in the center as spirit. But this is my spiritual journey, and while my mothers are my guides, the only ones who can walk this path is me. Now for the $1,000,000 question. Do I believe my mothers are real? Yes, but also no. It's a bit hard to put into words. It's ineffable, you could say. I'm going to use the same words I used to answer a comment on r/pagan. I see them as both stories, energies, and entities. I used to think of the Christian God as a concrete being, not in the sense that you could see or touch them, but in the sense that they were 100% there, and if there was doubt, then your faith wasn't strong enough. But I know that it's a very real possibility that I'm talking to nothing when it comes to my mothers. And yet I choose to follow them anyway, because it's a source of comfort for me. I think the bare bones of my belief is that there is just a great unexplainable energy in this universe that chooses to channel itself differently to different people. Some call it God, some call it Allah, some call it by multiple names like me. Some, like my fiancé, cut out the middleman and pray to/speak to/work with/worship that energy directly. Some, like me, believe in it through the form of another entity with a more distinct personality. I like the personal connection, so that's why I gravitate towards my mothers. And of course, every mythology comes from a once living, breathing religion. So the fact that they've persisted for so long has to mean something. To quote Maggie Smith, yes, Maggie Smith wrote Harry Potter, I don't know what you're talking about, who is this J.K. Rowling? Of course it's all in your head. But that doesn't mean it isn't real. And this is real to me. This is the most real I have ever felt towards something in terms of spirituality. I think back to the confused college students sobbing in the churchyard, wanting more than anything to feel something real, wanting to know all the way deep down in the darkest pit of their soul that they aren't alone. I think about looking at Z's peaceful face and hearing their personal connection to God and how desperately I wanted that. And now I have it. It's real. It's strong. It saved me. I chose my life. I chose my path. That's something no one can ever take away from me. Thank you all so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I have been the Maeve of all trades, and have a lovely day. Of shadows. I think I should... Layla is being very silly. This would normally be an entrance for my book. Layla! You're a good girl. And there was just a little... And there was just a strand of... And there was a strand of crowd...